Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Okay, I can't tell. Is it working? Okay, I can't hear. Okay. Is the mic on? Okay, because I can't tell. Thank you. All right, thank you for joining us for the Policy Committee meeting. Before we get started, first, if you would, and I heard one of you say it before, thank you so much, silence your phones. And then if you would join me in a moment of meditative thought and then the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll get started. Thank you. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First, we'll dispense with the formalities. This meeting Information Act. The news media has been notified and a copy of the agenda has been made available to the public. This meeting is open to the public and the public is welcome to attend in person. All persons wishing to attend the meeting by virtual means may do so via YouTube, Sumter School District Board Meetings, and Sumter School District's Facebook page. Vision. Sumter School District is committed to educating, empowering, and enriching the lives of all students to reach their potential. Mission. Sumter School District is committed to providing a safe, nurturing, and high-quality educational environment that supports diversity and equips students for local and global success. Thank you all for being here. Our board committee members are myself as chairwoman, Sherry White. I represent Area 7. Miss Brittany English, who is supposed to be arriving any moment now, and Mr. Matthew McLeod. We have Dr. Wright with us, of course. Our subcommittee members are Miss Andrea Loney and Mr. Chris Williams. And of course, we always have Miss Shantae Scott with us. We could not function without her. Thank you, Miss Scott. Okay, the first order of business that we're going to handle is the approval of the agenda. Any discussion about the agenda? Changes? All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Okay, that passes. That was easy. Okay. Also, the committee minutes from last time. This is kind of a formality. Are there any issues with the minutes from our last meeting, Mr. McLeod? Did you review them? Okay, any issue with that? Okay. In favor of approving? Okay, aye. Thank you. That passes. All right, let's get down to business. We have a lot of policies that we want to cover. Some of them are not going to take but a moment. Hopefully we've reviewed them. Some of them may take a little more discussion. We'll get through as many of these as is possible in the time allotted. I'm going to try not to hold you too late. Let's just go down the list and start with BA. I'm closing. Okay. A little better organized than I thought we were. I just didn't know it. Okay, very good. We are going to start. You have the PDF with all the policies in order, Mr. McLeod. Okay, we're going to go by that. So the first one is going to be BA. Board operational goals. This was last revised in 2011. And so these are the recommendations from SCASBA. This is kind of boilerplate, and according to South Carolina Code. Any discussion about this one? I did not see any errors, adjustments for the board. Dr. Wright, did you have any recommendations on that one?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so BA, we want to move forward as written. All in favor? Okay, I'm just going to say, Mac, do you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay, very good. Well, there are 3 committee members, and I will address that one question. There are 3 committee members, 2 are here, therefore there is a quorum. There are 3 board members, and that constitutes, that's where you have to get your quorum from. So we're good. Okay, moving forward. BAA. This is board self-evaluation. And I'm just going to read that opening paragraph. The board is committed to a continuous growth process and to leading by example. To that end, the board will conduct annual self-evaluations during either a regularly scheduled board meeting, special meeting, or a board retreat. The results of the self-evaluation will be reviewed each year and we would ask, we will get input from the chair and Dr. Wright as to when would be the appropriate time of year for that. So that is a date that I left open intentionally so that the board could vote on the date to be inserted there. And it will be used to establish board goals for the following year. At the next regularly scheduled board meeting following compilation of the results of the self-evaluation, the board chair will make a summary report of the process and results. We also can receive help from SCASBA on this process. Do y'all have any thoughts on this one? Mac? Okay, as it...
Most of these are set by SCASBA?
All of this came from SCASBA. These are the ones that have been revised and or updated with recommendations. We can tailor them to suit the Sumter School District as long as we remain within state law. So, and this is a kind of boilerplate. We can decide if we want to do that during regular board meetings, special meetings, or a board retreat. I was going to ask Dr. Wright what was customarily done. You are new to the district, but what do you, what's your input?
In the past, these evaluations, self-evaluations done by board are done with a short special meeting that adheres itself to that in my experiences in the past. And the board generally decides what month of the year that they're going to do that, and it's pretty consistent with honestly over the summer, so that because it talks about developing goals, so then goals are developed for the following year. That's kind of customarily what's done. I mean, I don't think it matters whether it's done during a portion of the regularly scheduled board meeting, but sometimes boards serve themselves better by doing that during a special meeting. So.
That was my thought. Mr. McLeod, you served on the board for some time. Can you give me a little feedback there?
We have done it in special call meetings, but we've also had board retreats as well.
Mm-hmm.
But usually that part is done. I mean, we may have a discussion during the retreat, but that part's done in special meetings.
So in actuality, for the purposes of the policy, The policy could read, self-evaluations during a special meeting or board retreat as determined annually by the board. Would that be an acceptable
I think so.
delineation there?
I think so.
Okay, we'll make that change, and when we present it to the board, that's how it will read, okay? Anything else in this policy that you had any thoughts on either? Okay, we can move forward to the next one. Okay. BB is the board legal status. It's had 2 revisions. Apparently there's some, it does not look like there is any new code that was applied to this one. We're a political and corporate body. Our powers are spelled out by the Constitution and the General Assembly. I don't think there's a whole lot to add or take from this. Do y'all? Do you think so? Mr. McLeod, you look like you have a thought.
Well, I figured it out. I was looking at the adopted 2011, but it was revised in 2019. So
Right.
it changed from 7 to 9 ordinance.
Exactly. And there's no further change since that time as far as how we're organized. So the legal status, that's not anything we can change anyway. So we will move on to the next one. Okay. BBA is powers and duties. This is fairly boilerplate stuff. This is the same as it was before. I did not find anything in here other than the changes that we addressed with this one prior, Ms. Scott, did we not? We didn't cover BBA with the visiting the schools. Okay, yes. This is not the updated version that is here. We have an updated version that has already been, it's on the agenda for the next board meeting to be approved with the changes. So, and it has the language regarding the, that contained the changes for the visits to the schools, did it not? Okay. Those same changes that were approved in BBAR, excuse me, will transfer over to BBA. So that we have matching policies. Are you following? Okay, and that's already been submitted on the agenda as well.
So, Madam Chair, just for clarification.
Yes, sir.
This, are we combining BBA and BBAR because there are items in BBAR that are not in BBA and vice versa, so.
SCASBA submitted these separately to us as 2 different policies, and so the BBAR specifically addresses visiting schools and the procedures. And so the language that we use there needs to be included in the visiting schools part.
Okay.
They need to match.
All right,
Do you
I
agree?
must have missed yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think they should remain separate is what I'm,
Yes, they should be separate. However, the languages cannot contradict each other.
absolutely.
So that's the only change I'm saying that should be made to the BBA.
Okay.
is that that,
I must have
No.
misunderstood. As long as they're separate, because they're addressing two separate things.
yes. And that language that is there in the BBA will remain, and with the addition of the BBAR that we modified last time.
Okay.
And point of clarification, thank you, Ms. Scott, is BBAR is the regulation
Right.
aspect of it. So that's specific to us, am I understanding that correctly? That's how we will
So
operate.
regulations are, for lack of a better expression, operational procedures.
Right,
And they have an R attached,
Right.
whereas if an R is not attached, it is a board policy, just straight up board policy. So
Gotcha.
we look at regulations to describe more of the how-to as opposed to the actual policy. That's kind of the way it's always been described to me.
okay, that makes sense. So,
Yes, ma'am.
question for you then.
Yes, ma'am.
In the regulation part, BBAR, does the language there where we are saying that board members, and this one does not reflect the new language here,
Right.
that is, will go before the board at the next meeting. Should the R portion of that be included with just the board policy or not? Let them stand separately.
My opinion is that they should stand separately because the BBA is an overarching policy that is enhanced, if you will, by BBA-R. So
Okay,
you would be altering the policy to move stuff out of BBAR to BBA. Which in my opinion is not necessary, if I'm answering your question right.
okay,
Because R is a regulation and it controls operationally how to stay in compliance with BBA.
okay, so R would not nullify any part of A, nor
ma'am.
A
No, ma'am.
interfere with the R.
Right, that's
Just
right.
to be blunt,
Yes, ma'am.
okay.
It's a how-to document.
Right.
That's pretty much what it is.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for that clarification.
You're welcome.
All right. BBAR, we're going to go by because that was already addressed in a prior meeting with modifications ready for the board. Next will be BBAA, which is authority and responsibilities. These are also coming straight out of code, the Constitution, and Attorney General's opinion. I did not have a recommendation for any sort of adjustment to that. Did y'all? Okay. A lot of this is formality, but it's a formality that we must observe, so it is what it is. Okay, BBAAR. This simply spells out how we are, as a board, supposed to request information about the various departments, and how that information is then disseminated, correct? That is standard. I did not see any reason to make any kind of alteration to this. Did either of you?
No. Madam Chair, without going into too much detail, BBAAR, particularly the last paragraph, I would respectfully request that is discuss with the full board a little bit because we need clarity on, there've been a couple of,
Yes. Okay.
without
Point well
too much
taken.
detail.
Point well taken.
Yes, ma'am.
And so we will
Just be all right.
highlight that portion. And make sure that those fine points are clarified with the board discussed and everyone realizes that's the policy. Is that the point of that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I just,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. I did feel like that was something that we did want to make sure that everybody paid attention to, and thank you for saying that out loud.
Yes, ma'am.
Last paragraph, okay. Very good. Otherwise, I think we can move on from that one.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, BBB is board membership slash elections. This is all straight out of code from the General Assembly. And now we will move into, after the election next year, we're staggered every 4 years. 5 and 4, just like it will go on now that they've established our 9 districts. I don't see anything to be addressed there as well. Any input, comments? Okay. BBA, the qualifications. Again, that's codified through state law and the Constitution, and I don't see any point belaboring that matter either. Do y'all?
No, ma'am.
Pardon me while I make sure I have my notes correct. Okay, next. BBBC is board member resignation. I think this is a standard thing when an elected position is vacated by resignation. It actually reads, whenever a board member resigns prior to the end of his or her term of office for any reason other than a change of his or her permanent residence, he or she will submit an irrevocable letter of resignation to the board chair, including effective date of resignation. That is binding. And then state law will take over as to how that seat is filled. That's not something we have any control over. So I don't see any reason to belabor this one. Dr. Wright?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. McLeod? I don't think there's anything to do with that one, yes. Okay. BBBD is board member removal from office. Any board member who willfully commits or engages in chronic, unexcused absenteeism, misconduct in office, persistent neglect of duty in office, misfeasance, malfeasance, conflicts of interest, or is considered medically incompetent or medically incapacitated is subject to removal from office by the governor. Prior to removal, the board member will be given written notice of the specific reasons for the removal as well as an opportunity to be heard. Again, that's straight out of South Carolina Code of Laws. The only other way to remove someone is at the ballot box, correct? Okay, moving on. BBBE is unexpired term fulfillment and vacancies. We alluded to this with a previous one. This is, elections are held according to state law to fill any vacancies for whatever reason they arise. So that one doesn't bear further discussion either, correct? Okay. Okay. BC, board member conduct. There are a few items in here that have been highlighted. Most of these highlights are from SCASBA as to the changes that they made. And the first paragraph, board members must be nonpartisan in dealing with school matters. They must not subordinate the education of children and youth to any partisan principle, group interest, or personal ambition. I think it's good that that's clarified right at the beginning of that policy. Everything else has already been in place. Then we have a bullet point that has been added as a responsibility of each board member to endeavor to attend all meetings. Of course, things are going to happen that are going to prevent people from attending from time to time. Fortunately, we do have benefit of being able to attend virtually when it's possible. So that makes sense for that to be there. I don't see a problem with it. Did anybody else see anything in here that they thought did not belong for Sumter School District or anything to add? This addresses training, executive sessions, all of it. So I think we're fairly well covered. And again, so we will recommend those two highlighted items be made a part of this policy as well. Okay. Next is BCA, Board Member Code of Ethics. This is standard. It does not appear that they made any changes from the policy adopted in 2011. It spells out what board members will not do and things that are considered breach of ethics. Again, all this comes from the Ethics Commission, much of this. So anything to discuss, add, subtract, multiply, divide, anything? Okay, that one to me looked like it needed to just move forward as written. Okay. BCB, conflict of interest. Again, they're referring to the Ethics Act. Nepotism, employment, and volunteering are prohibited. I'm just going to comment on that one. I understand why we can't volunteer. There have been several times when there have been board members who want to volunteer within the school system for different things, but we just cannot do that. However, we can find folks to volunteer when at all possible. So anybody want to volunteer, you just contact Ms. Scott and we will get you on a list. Anything to add, contribute on this one? I think it's standard. I read it. They pulled it straight from the Ethics Commission and the Constitution. There's also a Attorney General's opinion that is applicable. And so I didn't see there's nothing to see here, so to speak. Okay. Dr. Wright, anything?
I agree, Madam.
Okay. Mr. McLeod?
I think it should remain as it is.
Okay. I mean, we can't change what the Ethics Commission says, and we certainly want to abide by it, so, okay. Next is BD, which is the organization of the board. Moving forward, this policy, I think, was a little different because of the way when we were sworn in this last time. And so now the policy reads that the organizational meeting will be held immediately following the November elections, which would be the very next board meeting. We'll not wait until January moving forward. Officers serve for 2-year terms. The only item in this that I think would be a good discussion item for the board as a whole, please tell me if you agree or disagree, is the next sentence that says officers can serve no more than 2 consecutive terms and must have a break of at least 2 terms before being voted back into his or her original office. My question was the 2-term break. Discussion, I mean, I wanted other people's thoughts on that one.
If we vote all officers in at the same time,
Yes.
then there's gonna be 2 years before we'll elect officers again anyway.
Yes, so they have a
This is
two-year
a
term.
Consecutive term, so that'd be 4 years. I think 1-term break would be enough.
Well, that was my thought, that for officers, you would not necessarily, okay, this is discussion. Do we want it to be to where you can only hold 1 term? And then there has to be a break? Or do we want to leave that option open? Or should it apply to all, and should it apply to all offices? This is a committee meeting, it's for discussion.
I think holding 2 consecutive terms, I don't have a problem with. They're having to wait
2 terms before you could hold,
before you could run
yes,
for that.
that same office, correct? That's how I'm reading it.
If you're chair and,
And then vice chair or parliamentary or whatever, you can, yeah,
Chair.
right. So, now you have been in other districts, Dr. Wright, we have not.
Yeah, so historically, where I've been, first of all, officers are elected to 1-year terms, and there is an election each year. That's typically the case. Now, most often, the positions don't change, the officers don't change necessarily any quicker than 2 years. But if we interpret the policy or the proposed policy as written, I'll substitute terms for years, because that's really the way to read it, in my opinion. I mean, it's fine to write it this way, but, so, you got each officer will serve for a 2-year term. Officers can serve no more than 4 consecutive years. That's really what it should read in terms of years. And then must have a break of 4 years before being voted back into his original office. What I think is going to happen, and that's why I agree that the discussion needs to be had, is you could get to a point potentially where you run out of people who can serve offices because you got a 9-member board with a 4-year lull period. So I think there needs to be language in there to either say something like, either 1 term, or it needs to say another office can be held or something. Because I think we understand what this means as it's written, but
Right.
I think there needs to be some point of clarification that a person can immediately go from, say, vice chair to chair, chair to vice chair, or what have you, because it doesn't say that here. And you could, somebody that's really pushing the envelope could say, it does say original, but I think the language needs to be a little bit more descriptive than just using the word original, in my opinion.
Okay, so I have a question based on the first part of your statement.
Right.
Other districts, you said, had elections every year. Now, sometimes the same people were elected to the same office.
That's correct.
However, sometimes not, I would assume.
That's correct.
Did you see problems with continuity?
My personal opinion, I don't know if it's my professional opinion, is that a 2-year term is not excessive nor too little. I mean, I think it's it's probably a good amount of time. The reason why I think boards typically have space to elect officers each year has a lot to do with the need for flexibility should it exist. If an officer is not serving the board well for whatever reason. I think that's why it's written that way, but then people pretty much assume that you're going to be there for 2 years plus in those roles. But matter of fact, this is the first one I've ever seen that's written with a 2-year term in there. In my 10 years as superintendent, I haven't seen another policy written that way. But
Okay, so you
that
don't.
doesn't mean it's not right. I'm just
Right,
saying.
right. So
Sure.
generally speaking, they're 1-year terms.
Yes, well, policies are written that way, yes, ma'am. And they can be
And-
consecutive.
Right. How many, do other districts limit consecutive terms, if they're 1-year terms? Do they limit consecutive terms?
I have seen language similar to where it says that they must have a break of a specific period of time. I don't know that I've seen it be 4 years, but I've seen it. I've seen there be a break requirement in policy, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I tend to agree that there should be a break.
Sure.
I also tend to think that there may be benefit of 1-year terms. However, that would be a matter for discussion for the board, so we could suggest to the board that, and I think you may, I'm hoping you're fixing to say what I think you're going to, but,
I think that we need to put this on one of the agendas soon to come.
to
for
discuss
discussion
this
with the board.
policy
Yes, ma'am.
specifically? Okay,
And not just specifically for, one discussion as in 1 year, but to discuss it all around. But
Yes.
I like the idea as well of 1-year terms, voting each year.
right, and you may very well elect the same person again.
Right.
For continuity purposes. But it also, and please do not misinterpret this, I fully support what Chairman Candy is doing right now. He is doing an excellent job. But the next chairman, whoever that person may or may not be, we may say, uh-oh.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? So it does give a little latitude it gives flexibility. So I think, Ms. Scott, if we could take BD and put it on the agenda for a discussion matter with the board at the first board meeting where that's appropriate, because I do think this needs to go ahead and be discussed and clarified and passed, whichever way we
I
go.
could even agree with 1-year terms with a 1-year break.
I would not have a problem with that either. I mean, it makes sense. If you want to have a 1-year term,
To hold the- to
maximum
hold the
2,
same office.
you could, that's up for discussion. There are a
Right.
lot of ways that could be written that would be workable and still provide continuity.
Right.
Do you think we're on the right track here, Dr. Wright, based
We
on
need
your
to
knowledge?
discuss it.
It needs to be
I
discussed.
certainly think that there's room for discussion about this policy. As opposed to the other ones, I think that they should be recommended for adoption. But yes, I think BD is one that should be placed on the discussion list. For the
Okay,
board.
so we're going to recommend that this goes to discussion regarding specifically terms.
Yes.
And the election process is the process. And that's the process in most organizations. So, and it follows Robert's rules. The rest of it is pretty boilerplate, so we do need to discuss that second little paragraph there with the board before we do anything else with this policy. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay, move forward. Okay, BDR, we already addressed this one last time. And there is an updated version that is going before the board for approval at the next meeting, so we can move past that one. That one is already on the agenda, correct, Ms. Scott? Okay. The next one is BDD, the board superintendent relationship. Well, I think right now it's pretty darn good, let's just say that, okay? Let's see. This pretty much delineates the job, what the board will do and what the superintendent will do as they relate to each other. I'm particularly interested in your input, Dr. Wright, as superintendent. They did not make any suggestions of change.
Yeah, my professional opinion regarding this policy is that what is written here is what needs to be done consistently.
Those are my thoughts as well.
Yeah.
Mr. McLeod? Okay. So, BDD, move forward, and we may want to reiterate at the time
Absolutely.
that all board members need to respect this policy.
Well, I think we need to have this one printed out and handed out at the next meeting.
I have no problem with that. Ms. Scott, did you catch that? Okay, sounds like a wonderful recommendation. Yes. Okay, and so I didn't see anything that, other than enforcement and observance, I didn't see anything to change. Okay. Okay. BDE. This has to do with the board committees. And there's a lot of highlight on this one. I just want to kind of skim through here. Obviously, the board believes that it operates most effectively with committees. The chair may appoint standing and special committees when the need arises. The chair will accommodate board member committee preferences to the best extent possible. That was added, and to me, that's good language. The function of standing and special committees are for fact-finding, deliberative, and advisory, but never legislative or administrative. We report our findings to the board for discussion and action. This is where committees, it's my understanding, deal with the minutia and make the recommendations to the board for general discussion and approval. Is that a correct take on that? Okay, the board also recognizes the need to obtain community input on vital matters confronting it. Thus, representation on committees should be broad-based with emphasis on persons who have some expertise or interest in the area being studied, such as community members or other interested citizens. This committee actually does have citizen members on it. They just were not able to be here tonight. They have participated before. And they have all of these policies before them and had them in advance, and we didn't get any feedback, so I am assuming that they did not have input in their absence. All committee meetings are open to the public except for executive session items as permitted by law. Committees will make reasonable and timely efforts to give notice of their meetings in accordance with applicable provisions of FOIA. Okay, the superintendent is always an ex officio member on standing and special committees, and also a valuable opinion provider.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Hey, listen, I'm the first to recognize that it's just like we have people with expertise from different areas serving on different committees, finance and whatnot. People have different experiences. Your experience is valuable. It hasn't all been here, but it is broad-based, and so your input should always be welcome, and it is always welcome in this committee, I can promise.
Thank you.
Okay, the standing committees. The board establishes the standing committees that it deems necessary to support the work of the board, study operations, and makes recommendations. The chair of each standing committee will be appointed by the board chairman, subject to board approval, and a standing committee may be abolished at any time by a vote of the board. Special committees, the board chairman can appoint special committees when the need arises, subject to board approval, such as our Transportation Ad Hoc Committee is a special committee right now. Confidentiality and conflict of interest. All information and documentation received and discussed in executive session will be treated with strict confidentiality. As with board members who are subject to rules of conduct of the South Carolina Ethics Act, all committee members who have an actual or potential conflict will notify the school board of such conflict immediately. On an annual basis, all members of the committee will be provided with a copy of this policy and required to complete and sign an acknowledgement and attestation form. Okay, I think that's important that we actually emphasize and follow that part. Any part of that y'all agree, disagree, add, subtract? All the committees are subject to FOIA. And I don't see anything else on that one. Does anybody else have anything to offer on that one? Are we good with the highlighted language?
I would like for us to look at where it mentions executive sessions during committee meetings, because and this may be addressed in
Which paragraph?
in BEC, that's where it says all committee meetings will be open to the public except for executive session. Executive session items as permitted by law. It's just above standing committees, two paragraphs above.
Okay.
In my
Okay, so-
opinion,
yeah.
committees should not go into executive session. Because then you're taking people who are not sworn in, not under oath into executive session, and they
Right.
are open to information.
That is a valid point. There is, however, this provision, and this I caught that before, and it does. if we enforce the confidentiality, signing the document by all committee members, that would help with that, but I do tend to agree that committees that have members of the public in an executive session kind of do not go together
Right.
because of the legal boundaries of the executive session
Yes.
itself. Are we in the right realm there, Dr. Wright?
I'm not even sure, I had not read this, but I'm not even sure that you can legally conduct an executive session with the numbers of board members you have on committees, with 3 board members. I've never heard of that. I'm not sure that you can even do it. So I
And I
think
think
that
right.
language needs to be struck.
Yes, I
honestly.
agree.
I interpreted it to mean there are items that are bound to executive session.
Right. They
There are
could be
policies that
recommended for it.
pertain to those.
Right.
So we could say, I don't see where a committee would need or should ever go into an executive session. So,
I mean, honestly, I think that that paragraph should read, all committees will be open to the public, and except for executive session items should be stricken from it, in my opinion. That takes care of, I mean, because I don't, if you have an executive session item that comes up in committee session, that should be referred to the actual meeting, the next regular meeting. That's my opinion, Madam Chair. I think that's what you asked for, so that's my
yes,
opinion.
I agree.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just trying to find the sentence now. Sorry.
Yeah, 4th paragraph.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so all committee meetings will be open to the public, period. We don't even have to say as permitted by law,
Right.
because committee meetings are open to the public.
Right.
Okay. Yes. So just strike after public. The rest of that sentence, anyway.
Yes, ma'am, that's my opinion.
And I agree. Okay. So we will recommend as written, except for that one change. And we strike the balance of that sentence.
Right.
All right. Otherwise, I don't think it addressed that anymore. Okay. All right, moving along.
On the confidentiality and conflict, you gonna strike it there as well? The first one?
Yes.
Yes. Same sentence, same strike, yes. Thank you. Okay, now, BDER. And again, this is the regulation that applies to the policy we just discussed, right?
Yes.
The one thing about this one is it does spell out the standing committees that we're supposed to maintain, and I I think this would help some members of the public who were wondering about the different committees, and these are the standing committees, so the Board Policy Committee, obviously, the Finance Committee, excuse me? Yeah, facilities, you're moving quicker. Your finger moves faster than mine. Facilities, Citizens Advisory Committee. Okay, okay, the last paragraph of this addresses confidentiality and conflict of interest again. But again, there's not a conflict of interest, obviously, is everybody's responsibility to disclose and avoid. But no committee goes into executive session. So, but this does not say anything about, it does say information and documentation received and discussed in executive session will be treated with strict confidentiality. It doesn't say a committee's executive session. It just says executive session in general. So.
The whole policy is around board committee.
Exactly. So I don't think, I don't know that we need information in that first sentence, because this is not a confidential, none of the committees are confidential.
That's right.
Meetings at all,
All open to the public.
including finance, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Wright, there's no aspect of that that would be confidential or executive session, is it?
No, ma'am. Technically, committee meetings are supposed to be, for lack of a better expression, work sessions where
Right.
items are discussed and then recommendations are made to the full board for action, whatever that action is, whether it is information sharing, and that could be the case, action that requires voting, or action that needs to be discussed in executive session and then a decision made on it. So the committees are really designed to dig in, if you will, to specifics around, just like we're doing tonight. We're looking at these policies
Right.
and making, seeing if they're ready to go
Recommendations.
to the full
Right.
board, right? But we're not, you're not voting on policy tonight.
Correct.
And that's kind of the way committees are set up, all of them, whether they're finance, facilities, or what have you.
Right, so the first sentence in that paragraph
Right.
is not really necessary, is it? Because this policy or regulation is specific to committees. BDER, right? So it's specific to committees. Do we need that sentence, or does it hurt anything to leave it there?
I think it's okay to leave it in there. The only part in there where it says allowable executive sessions, that doesn't really apply. But the rest of it, you gotta operate in accordance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act, obviously. Notice of meetings, these meetings are
Right.
supposed to be notified, minutes are supposed to be recorded. And allowable executive sessions. I mean, we've stated tonight that we believe that the board's gonna approve for executive sessions not to be a part of it. And so that would really be unnecessary. All other applicable federal, state, and local laws and in keeping with the roles and responsibilities of the board. All of those things should be in there, and the allowable executive sessions is you know, it's okay to leave it in there because we're gonna say we're not gonna
Right.
use executive sessions in
Okay,
committee meetings.
so we can just leave it alone.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this one, as it sits,
It's okay,
can move forward.
yes.
Okay. There is the, okay, the next is the BDEE, which is the Conflict of Interest and Acknowledgement and Disclosure Form, excuse me. I think the key thing here is this needs to be passed out and enforced. But move it along as it sits. I did not see any issues with it, did y'all?
No.
Okay. Okay, next is BDF, advisory committees. Advisory committees may be created for limited purposes or to provide continuing consultation in a particular area of education. So these are committees that we may have but are not required to have, is how I'm reading that.
All right, and most boards around the state don't have committees. We're one of the few, if there are
That
any-
actually has
if there are
working
any more
committees?
that have committees now.
Really?
Yes,
How do you
ma'am.
get anything done?
Most committee work is taken up or done through work sessions where problems or issues are identified, and then a work session is created to address those. I don't know if we've talked much about that lately, but that's the way most districts typically handle it. There are some very large districts, you know, if it's a 100+ thousand student district that might have some committees, but again, even those are
Ad hoc,
typically.
temporary.
That's right,
Right.
ad hoc or temporary committees.
Right.
There are very few districts in today's school environment that have
Advisory
standing
committee?
committees, as we call them.
Oh, standing,
here.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the advisory committee policy, can go forward as written?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yes.
Because again, it's written as may be created, not will be, okay. BDFR, which is School Improvement Councils. Dr. Wright, would you
Yes,
care to
ma'am.
weigh in on that one?
All right, let me get back to it, Madam Chair,
That's
so I
okay.
can talk intelligently here. So anytime we're talking about something that has an R attached to it, it's a regulation, which means it's kind of an operational procedure. It does not rise to the level of being a policy, but it kind of informs what we do. Process-wise, we obviously have school improvement documents that we submit every so often, and you know, we follow these procedures, assist in the preparation of the 5-year school improvement or renewal plans. You all get the opportunity to view those when the appropriate time presents itself. We're supposed to be in alignment with the school reading plan as required by the Read to Succeed Act. So all of these things in here are operational procedures, if you will, that we follow. and are appropriate as I'm looking at them.
Okay, and that was one reason I wanted you, especially since
ma'am.
it is process.
Yes, ma'am.
More process than policy, to make sure that, if there's anything that needs to be added, subtracted, in your opinion,
Right.
as long as we were in state law, of course.
I think in the spirit of what's written here, it is consistent with what we are required to do and
Okay.
do, so.
Okay, and that sounds good. Okay, so this one we will recommend to move forward.
Okay,
Okay. BDG, Board Attorney and Legal Services. Personally, and this is my personal opinion for purposes of discussion, I think this one needs to be a discussion issue
okay,
with the board as a whole and perhaps in executive session. Reason being, you're talking about legal representation of the board, the district, and there are differences. And so I think this policy, and there's some italic recommendations here, differentiation between independent counsel, general counsel, that kind of stuff. I think this policy may do well to be discussed in executive session by the board. Opinions?
I agree, and I think there's, not to discuss tonight, but several things that need to be addressed in this.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Scott, you got that? I knew you did. Okay. BDGR is pretty much how you handle BDG, right? So now, this is fairly basic. Does not affect who, I don't think it's qualifications of an attorney. Well, that's kind of, you know. But I do think this needs to be included in the discussion with BDG in executive session to make sure that they match up once BDG is established, how we want it to read.
yeah, Madam Chair, if I may, the only thing that, for me, that I think needs to be
Please.
discussed out of BDGR is, where it says the board and superintendent will annually evaluate the performance of the attorney. I think that, there probably should be some kind of document created, to do that, where we're looking at his or her services and that kind of thing, and, you know, kind of as a process, once a year, so.
Okay, that could be part of the recommendation
Sure,
in the discussion
sure.
of the,
Or if the board, I've seen this happen too, sometimes the board will ask the attorney to come in and enter into a discussion with them about how well, what they've been doing and how they've been serving. So whatever the board's pleasure would be, but that probably warrants
I
some
think-
discussion.
yeah, both could be discussed at the same time, I think,
That's correct.
in executive session to clarify all those
That's correct.
fine
Yes,
points.
Mhm.
Agreed? Okay. Okay, BDH. board consultants. And this has been established policy prior to this board. Well, going back to 2011 anyway. Enlist the services of consultants to provide specialized advice, training, or assistance. I didn't see anything in here that really needed to be altered.
That's pretty standard.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's voted on by the board and approved before we farm out this stuff anyway, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so BDH can move along as written.
Yes.
BE board meetings. Okay, there are a few changes in this one highlighted in yellow. The annual meeting, the organizational meeting is in November. We already addressed that in a previous policy, so that language should be inserted here. That is the board meeting in which the new board members are sworn in, officers elected, et cetera, et cetera. Regular board meetings, we already voted to change how we did that prior, so this kind of lines up with that. The board meetings are scheduled at the district office or location determined by the board on the second Monday of each month. Regularly scheduled time will be 6 p.m. All meetings will adjourn no later than. I think that needs to have a time in it. That is my opinion.
6:30.
Everybody has one. That's mine. Okay. Can I get an amen?
I agree.
Okay. Thank you, ladies. I think we should recommend a time in this area, and these are my reasons, is I think this will help facilitate tightening up the way the meetings flow and encourage attendance. I like that input. Thank you very much. Encourage attendance if people know that they're not going to be here late, but however, it helps board members as well. You know you have a start time and an end time, and we can make sure that this is the amount of business that we need to get done, so we don't need to dilly-dally. And that encourages everybody to, although we all need to be able to voice our opinions,
But we don't need to just
voice
talk
our
to hear ourselves
input.
talk.
That's right. This will limit, and I am not saying anybody does this, but this would help alleviate beating dead horses,
Yes.
so to speak. So, I strongly suggest that we insert a time. Now, do we want the board to discuss that time, or do
Yes.
we want to suggest the time?
I think we need discussion.
Put it up for discussion
Yeah.
as far as the time is concerned.
Because even if
The
we
other
suggest it, it's
aspects
still
of
going to be
this
for
are,
discussion. I said even if we suggest the time, it's still going to be for discussion, so
well, this is true,
let's open it up.
true. So, let's make sure that on BE, that we discuss BE in the next, I guess these are gonna fall under a work session, all of these that need to be discussed. Discuss the time that meetings will adjourn. There's also the suggested option that there will be no meeting held in, they leave it open. Now, please help me remember, I'm sorry, it's been a long day,
Sure.
the time frame when the school district office is closed.
I don't think we usually meet in July, do we?
So typically, because this will be my first round here now, so I want to be clear about that. Typically, there is a space and time in July and December where board meetings might be suspended in most districts. So
And we set that up when we set the schedule.
that's correct.
Right.
That's correct. And so when we get to that point, I think there needs to be consideration for when is and is not appropriate to do that. Also, if I may, Madam Chair, this is a suggestion from me. Since I've been here, we have called the meetings on the fourth Monday of each month work sessions.
Yes.
That's the name that we've given those meetings. In essence, what we have is 2 regular board meetings per month. Board sessions, just as it's written here, are generally set aside for work on a particular topic or topics, and they are set up as deemed necessary. So if indeed we're going to have a board meeting every second and every fourth Monday, which I do not recommend, but if that's what we're going to do, then in my opinion, we need to rename the meetings that we have on the fourth Monday, because they're not work sessions. You understand, right now they're regular board meetings.
And he's correct, but I think instead of renaming it, I think that we need to turn it back into a work session.
Okay.
This kind of stuff that we're talking about tonight is work
Work
session
session.
stuff.
Yes,
Sure,
work
yes, sir.
session stuff,
Right.
exactly.
Yes, sir.
I agree. I don't think there should be 2 board meetings,
Right.
and one of them has some work session stuff. I
Right.
agree that second meeting of the month, when necessary, should be a work session.
Right.
Now, I understand right now, and this is just me kind of talking out loud here, right now, as a new board, fairly new board, you know, the policies, SCASBA is going through everything. So that's getting thrown at us left and right. And some of these things are, as we see, nothing to see here, move along, move along, move
Right.
along. But we have to approve them as a board. We have to implement them for our district or not. So we have to go through this. So there are more policy meetings, there are more committee meetings, there are more work sessions. Right now, I think as we're all tackling the big jobs that needed to be addressed fairly quickly. As a rule, however, I agree with what Dr. Wright said, that perhaps the language under work session needs a little work itself to address that there is not, it says the fourth Monday at 6 p.m. of each month will be set aside for work sessions as deemed necessary.
Right.
Okay, so that means you don't have to have it,
Correct.
correct? So the language
Is correct.
for that part is correct. However, I do think we need to emphasize when we review this policy, emphasize this part or the next part as to what the sessions are used for. And they're not actual full-scale board meetings. Of course, they're always open to the public. They can watch everybody work, just like committees and everything else.
And normally there should not be action items during the work session.
No. They would be similar, okay, correct me if I'm wrong, similar to, this should become an action item for the next board meeting.
That's right.
Okay, so that's typically how it probably should operate.
Yes, ma'am.
No action items during a work session, but recommendations for them to be on the next.
Right.
Like we're doing
And
in
it certainly
committee.
shouldn't be predetermined
Right.
action items. I mean, if the board says, well, we got this problem solved and we wanna, take action on it, that's one thing, but we have both meetings set up currently and have been since I've gotten here as
Regular
regular
meetings.
board meetings, but that's not what we're calling them. I mean, so,
Okay, so that's language that can be discussed with the board to make sure that,
right,
the work session is actually treated as a work session.
yes, ma'am.
And the only action item perhaps, and this would be part of the discussion, would be if something has arisen that needs
Right.
attention. And
Right.
the agenda can be amended for that.
Right, or we might have to have space for things like personnel comes to mind. I mean, there's always gonna be the need to hire, and as long as the board understands that, but work sessions are designed, in my opinion, to have a broader look at an item, a problem that you're trying to solve, as opposed to, board meetings are typically, let's go through these action items that we already know pretty much what we're gonna do and those kind of things. So work sessions are more in-depth on solving problems.
Work sessions are where other districts do their committee stuff.
Right.
There you go.
They handle their committees. They are the
Like
committee.
this month is policy, this month is this.
Well, I mean, it may
this
be a
month-
little bit of
whatever.
each,
Right, yeah,
but that's how most of them operate.
right. Okay, I would also say that, we could make sure that, and this would be part of the discussion of this policy, is that unless there are immediate personnel matters or disciplinary issues that belong in executive session that need to be addressed now and not at the next meeting, that would be the only time you would need an executive session
Right.
during a work session meeting.
Mhm.
Before, during, or after. You just shouldn't need one unless one of those two situations has presented itself. And then, of course, the agenda would again be amended, because that would be a more emergency situation, correct, Dr. Wright?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, if we're
And
gonna look
it
at
can happen.
personnel, if we're gonna look at personnel twice a month, then you would need a short executive session for that,
Right.
Right.
so.
Right, and any sort of disciplinary appeals or anything
Right.
like that that were to crop up that needs to be addressed now. There are always exceptions that can be addressed by amendment to the agenda, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we'll discuss, time adjustments and work sessions.
Right.
And no executive session for the work session. And incorporate that language here, depending on what the board decides in discussion, and then we'll prepare the new policy. Okay, the special the rest of this is kind of standard. Yeah, I don't see anything else in here that merits further discussion. Do y'all?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Next is going to be BEC, which is executive sessions and open meetings. We kind of discussed that a little bit just now. There are no changes here, and even based on our discussion, it doesn't dictate here when we'll have executive sessions, so. I don't see any recommendations for this. Do you have any?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And a lot of that is simply covered by law anyway. Okay, BED. DA. Meeting notification, of course, that is a FOIA issue. There is public notice. Board members are made aware. We get all of our stuff in advance like we're supposed to. It's in here. Again, this is law. Nothing to see here for change. Agree? Okay. BEDB. The agenda. The only thing highlighted within this, which indicates some sort of change, is a written request, which can be electronic or paper. That's in paragraph 2. Says it must be received by the superintendent or board chair a minimum of 6 business days prior to the desired meeting for it to be reviewed for the agenda. Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about the 6 days?
I think that 6 days is pushing it because of what we have to do to prepare. It should not be any less than that, just because when requests are made, typically they require some form of preparation. So I think right now for our May 8th meeting, Ms. Scott has already sent out correspondence asking for our staff to send things in that they want us to consider. And so it's always helpful for us when we get as much time as we can to prepare, because sometimes your requests require staff members to do research, pull information together, and so forth and so on, and of course that takes time. So I think 6 is as little time as we would need. 7 would be better, but 6 is.
I think asking from one meeting to the next is too short. Because when we ask them for something,
That's right.
we're pulling them away from work that we're expecting them to do, we're paying them to do.
That's right.
I think we need to give them, from one regular meeting to another regular meeting. Or at least come present it at a work session, is what we've done way back in the past, when you and I served before.
Yes, sir.
They would come present it at a work session. That way we can discuss it. If we need to take action, then it's at the next meeting.
And the other thing that gives us a little bit of pause, I think my executive team would tell you that if we're preparing something to be considered for an action item for a regular meeting that is rote, pretty easy to do, that's one thing. If we're preparing for a work session item, something that requires more detail, honestly, we need 6 days would not be enough notice for those kinds of things. I mean, I think it just depends on, but the way it's written, if we're gonna say a minimum, my opinion is that it needs to be at least 7 business days.
Well, then I think the board needs to be flexible and ask him, can this department get this done
That's
at
really what
this
we
amount of
have to
time?
say.
Right.
Because, we don't know what they're doing.
Exactly.
mean,
There's
honest-
day-to-day operation that it has to
Right,
carry on.
and that we're not involved in that,
Yeah.
shouldn't be involved in that, but he does know what they're doing. So if, they're in the middle of getting ready for testing that we're not aware of, then he knows that, and he says, well, there's no way we can get it done in 6, 7 days. We're gonna need 2 weeks, we're gonna need 3 weeks.
Right.
But whatever he says they need, then that's what we need to go with.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is perhaps this could say, to be considered for placement on the agenda of the regular board meeting, regular monthly board meeting, 7 days. And then we could add, and of course, written request. Do you even want paper? Would you prefer electronic?
We want paper, we want electronic.
Electronic. Okay, let's scratch or paper. Let's put written request, parentheses, electronic,
Saving money.
the
Madam
end.
Chair, I just deferred to the person who's actually gonna receive the electronic.
Well, that makes sense to me, that's why I asked. Okay, so
You know,
we're gonna say, we're gonna recommend 7 days
yes,
for the regular board meeting, which is the second Tuesday, second
Right.
Monday, excuse me.
Recommend to request within 7 days.
Yes. And
Right.
then I'm thinking, because of what we just talked about with work, having actual work sessions, well, those will be more or less a month apart. So I would think that 3 weeks' notice would not be out of line. Minimum 2 weeks out of line for work session, request for work session items.
And that would depend on how detailed and how
Mm-hmm,
large the request is.
right.
I mean, if it's something that's gonna take 2 weeks of research, we got to remember that that's 2 weeks of research on top of what they're already doing.
Exactly. As an example, if you just want to know how many buses we own, that's a simple task.
Yeah, we can find that out tomorrow.
Exactly. But if you want to deep dive into certain test scores in certain subjects or whatnot, especially if testing is going on
Right.
or certain events, then these things take more time to compile and put in a way that they can be presented coherently.
And I know a lot of the board members are new. Most of the board members are new. They don't understand it. Just because the offices are up here doesn't mean that this is where they're out. They're out working in the schools. They're all over the place.
Right, exactly. So I don't think it is unreasonable for the superintendent and all associated staff to need
Right.
ample notice for requests. So,
and Madam Chair.
Yes.
To be honest with you, if I can retain the flexibility to be able to hear what the board is asking for and assess and determine with my staff what kind of time frame we need. We're not going to be in the business of putting you all off,
oh, no.
but we do need time depending on what the items are and what's going on in the district. Like honestly, like right now between now and the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th, finance would be limited, for instance, in what they would be able to provide because they're trying to close out the year and they're trying to prepare next year's budget and get it approved and things of that nature. So if we ask them for something that would require 40 man-hours to get the work done, that might be a big ask to have done by the next work session meeting. I'd like to retain the flexibility to be able to consult with the appropriate staff members and then say we can do X by this, keeping in mind that we want to provide the information to you all as quick as possible. So
Right, well, the next sentence does say the board chair in consultation with the superintendent will decide whether or not to include requested items.
Okay.
And if somebody requests something and you cannot provide it within that time frame, then you currently have that flexibility to say that cannot be provided
yes, ma'am.
at this time for this reason, right? This does not eliminate it, does it?
No, ma'am.
Okay,
If the policy is done as it is interpreted here, it's fine.
we just need folks to observe it.
Yes, ma'am. That's
Okay.
correct.
Now, the last sentence in this paragraph, it says, and this is an option, if perhaps 3 or more board members request the addition of an item, it will be added to the agenda. Thoughts? I mean, it's been
I
here.
think that's typical. Yes, ma'am. I think it is.
That is based on other associations that I am in. That's a standard, and 3 is actually a standard number as well. 3 or more members of the committee, members of the board request something, then,
Yeah, I actually think,
of
Madam
course,
Chair,
it's
that
all
most,
still within reason.
I actually think that most districts do use the word majority to add agenda items. I think that's,
Okay.
but let's
Right.
research that. I mean, I
Okay,
think
so,
that's the case.
well, that can be discussed.
Yes, ma'am.
That's something the board can discuss as a
Sure,
whole.
Sure,
Do
sure.
we want 3 board members to be able to say, we want this put on the agenda, or do we want to have at least 5 of them, 5 people chime in and
Right.
say, we want this on the agenda? I think that's a fair point to discuss.
Right.
Would you
Yes, ma'am.
agree?
Yes, ma'am.
As to how it should be written within the policy. You keep looking like you want to say something.
No, I agree. We need to,
Okay.
I'm just thinking 3 or 5 in my head, but,
Well, there are 9 of us, so 5's a majority.
right. They need to be here.
No, yeah.
Do we need his staff here? They've been here for probably 11, 12 hours now, so.
Yeah, we are at,
Can that-
and we had said that we would go to 7, and you're right, it's 7:08. So we are going to wrap up this policy,
Okay.
and we will stop. So we will discuss the number of board members required to ask something to be added that is not already on the agenda. Okay. I didn't see anything else in here that we don't already do that's not law or anything else. Anything from either of y'all on this particular one?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So we were able to move through a lot of policy. And I'm hoping we'll be able to move through that much next time in less time. We will run into times when we are only going to discuss about 3 policies because there's a lot of meat there. But I felt like some of these we could go ahead and breeze through. They've been sitting there for a while from SCASBA. So I will get with Ms. Scott to confirm everything that we discussed that wanted to be brought forward. Yes, sir, Mr. McLeod.
Next paragraph. Second sentence, the board may amend the agenda during any meeting by 2/3 vote of the members present. I would like, should we,
Excuse me.
You would like to what?
have we not been going by a majority vote?
Right, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I'd like to see it changed to a majority vote and not 2/3.
Board will
But I
follow the
mean,
order of
discuss
business
that.
unless the order is altered by a majority vote of the members. Oh, that's the order of business, okay. May amend the agenda during any meeting by a 2/3 vote present if the matter is a discussion item.
I've never heard of that.
Okay, we need to, yes, I agree. I'm glad you caught that. Ms. Scott, if we could strike 2/3 vote and change it to majority vote. The second to the last paragraph. Second sentence. Okay. I'm glad you caught that. I missed that. Yeah. Anything else for the good of the committee?
Yes, ma'am. At our May 8th meeting, do we have the policy number or anything? What is it, Dr. Coombs? GCLE and GCLER are newly approved policies, I think, or updated for sure, that are mandated by the state government about unencumbered time. Madam
Correct.
Chair, Mr. McLeod, that was a policy that was brought to us, and we are mandated to implement it. So I don't know whether it really rose to discussion in this. The recommendation for me is to prepare it to bring to the board on the agenda for the May 8th meeting. It still lends itself to discussion if the board chooses to have such, but it is a mandated implementation from the state of South Carolina. So I'm not sure that we could get much done about that if we wanted to. So
Well, it's mandated,
yes, ma'am.
so, and I think based on what I read, the facilitation of it would fall under the R part
That's
of
correct.
that.
That's correct. That's
And I'm
correct.
sure you've been working on that.
We have begun to work on it. Obviously, it's going to be a bit of a challenge because of the staffing that we currently have in our schools. But we understand that that mandates are mandates. Unfortunately, is the camera still on? That's okay. Unfortunately, all of them are not funded. You know, we get mandates all the time. Some are funded and some are not. So, but yes, ma'am, we are beginning to work on it, and we'll continue to work on it and try to figure out how to make it happen.
And if I remember correctly, when
Right.
I read the mandate and read the language, some things, there is some language in there that says, as long as it doesn't interfere with
Sure.
instruction, and it does provide a little bit of wiggle room
Yes,
as
ma'am.
it pertains to the safety and instruction of the children. So I thought that was good.
Yes,
And I'm
ma'am.
sure you're trying to work with that the best you can. So yes,
Yes, ma'am.
again, that's a mandate that we have to address. So
Right.
yeah.
So I just want to
totally
be clear
agree.
that that's why I didn't try to add this to this committee's agenda, because it is a mandate that we're going to have to pass, probably whether we want to or not. So,
Okay.
yeah, thanks.
All right, anything else? Thank y'all so much, and if there are no objections, we are going to stand adjourned.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good meeting.
We do a lot of stuff.